Hello and welcome back. Got an interesting one for you today. I'm going to be reading it. It's a sort of, in her own words, it's from this lady that I met around 1999. She was living and working in Blackpool in England. Very gifted psychic healer and medium. Her name was Paula. And everyone in Blackpool pretty much will know who Paula is. Paula's passed over, although I think she's still about in a big way here. And we got to be friends. And I helped Paula. She did a lot of charity work and I worked with her. And I helped her, and she would, we would chat and she would help me, give me guidance and advice. I was a writer. I am a writer, not hugely published, but I've always enjoyed writing, and I wanted, I've been dabbling in writing articles and having some success in getting them seen by people. And Paula wanted me to write a book, and she also wanted me to work with her producing some teaching materials. Unfortunately, we made a good start on these things, but life got in the way, and she had some health issues, and I had a new husband, and a lot of life situations got in the way, and our paths separated, and for many years I had absolutely no contact with her, and then I learned that she'd become very ill and she'd passed over. So I just sort of had sealed up a lot of the work that we'd begun together, and put it away. And it is really, ironically, at the end, now that that marriage that interrupted our work, is in fact over, I've started to unearth, a lot of the stuff I was doing before I get involved in that relationship. And, I feel the urge to finish what we started in a big way. I don't know. I think one day I will. I'm certainly going to produce a course on the spiritual wheel of life that she taught me. And this I'm going to read to you now was a precursor to, explaining how that course came about. I also have, I think, a really fascinating, in her own words, account of her spiritual development and the things that she saw and did as a young person, a child, a young adult. And true life stories of what she experienced, which I think are fascinating. This here I think is fascinating. The English might not be 100% correct because Paula's English wasn't 100% Oxford English. It was she'd her own rough northern accent. So anyway, I'm going to read you this. And I love your feedback, and it talks about how she came to start developing the wheel of life, or its origins, where it came from for her to be able to teach it to me and others, others of her students. Okay, so we're sort of jumping in near the end of her working life. She was very advanced at this stage, and she'd done a lot of good in the world. But she had developed these headaches, and she was seeking answers as to how to cope with them. So bear with me, and I really hope you enjoy this. These are all in Paula's words, and I've just sort of typed them up. The pain was intense. It felt like a fire burning in my head. It would not stop, and I was finding it harder and harder to cope. Something was happening to me, and I didn't know what it was. Everything I looked at seemed unreal, as if there was a haze around it, and I couldn't quite understand what was going on. When I walked, I felt as if I was not walking on the ground, and when I stopped walking, I felt as if I were sinking into the ground. I knew I needed to find someone who could help me understand what was happening and control it. It was at the Vishnu temples in Bolton that I finally found the answers to my questions. There I discovered my past, she's about my present and my future. There I came face to face with my true self and finally understood my destiny. Having been born psychic, I had grown used to strange things happening around me. I had always seen spirits. I had always been able to predict the future. And I had, up until this time, led an extraordinary life. Now everything was changing again. I was changing. In fact, I later realised that I was undergoing radical changes in the very alchemy of my mind and body. It was very difficult to find anyone who could understand this, anyone at a similar stage in their development. As soon as I walked into the Vishnu temples, I was greeted by a lovely lady called Nina. Nina had devoted her life to caring for the Hindu masters and later told me that she had immediately sensed that I was special from the energy surrounding me and understood that I needed help. I will be eternally grateful for her kindness, both that day and in the days which were to follow. I've got incredible waves pouring down on me here. It's beautiful, but it's almost overwhelming and it's quite hard to read, but it's beautiful. Nina quietly introduced me to an old priest called Ratatua, who was looking after the temple at that time. He had a very young priest with him whom he was training. Nina had told Ratatua that I was clairvoyant and a medium. Although she had not asked me this, she just knew it instinctively. Ratatua was explaining to the young priest that people like me have energy which goes into our hands and fingers, and we could use this to heal people. I listened to him intently, but he was not giving me the answers I needed. He then told me that there was a visiting Swami coming from India shortly, and he was to show him around. However, he was having a lot of difficulty because he had a bad hip. He asked me for healing. I was feeling so ill myself that I frankly did not think I was in any state to be giving healing. I was rather hoping that someone would heal me. Nevertheless, I agreed to call back on the following Thursday and give him healing. We began to talk and he asked me how old I was. I told him to mind his own business. He said, "You're nearly 49, Paula." And I replied, "Yes, I'm 48. He then said, "You do not remember who you are, do you?" I answered, "Yes, I do." And he smiled and said, "No, you do not know." What came next staggered me. He looked at me and said, "Do you not remember me, Paula? You not remember your previous life? You not remember being in India, Paula?" I firmly replied that I did not. Throughout my life, I have been told I was the reincarnation of many famous people, and quite frankly, I felt very sceptical about what he was saying to me. The old priest said, "You no believe us, do you, Paula? Your partner last time was called Vivi. What is her name this time?" I was stunned. My husband's name was Vinny. He asked, "Did you get your 4 children, Paula?" I did have 4 children. And he sighed, "You no remember being in India at 48 with a brain tumour? You no remember saying, 'This is the life I wish to live next time,' and we agreed? You no remember your name last time, Paula?" At this point, I rebelled at the deluge of information I was receiving. I felt very unsettled and flustered, and he continued, "You not remember promising to come home? To reappear at 49? I was to have my 49th birthday shortly. I shook my head and said, No, I don't remember." He led me to a nearby bench and he smiled. "Sit and remember, Paula. Sit and remember." "You still don't remember, do you?" I felt overwhelmed and I said, "I don't know whether I remember you or not. I'm tired of everybody telling me who I am and who I'm not." And he replied, "If you know who you are, then why are you here?" I turned to him and said, "Prove it to me." He smiled. "Sister Guru Paula wants it proving. You wasn't that hard to please the last time." And he laughed. "You wanted to prove it to us." He told me, "You wanted to prove you could do it as a female." He said, "Remember, Paula, pointing out the life you wished and saying, 'I am dying before I have reached Samadhi, and the next time I want that life. I wish to live a life as a Western female in a convent.'" Everything in the temple went quiet, and for the first time in my life I was speechless. He asked, "Did you get your convent education, Paula?" I had been born to a travelling family and had received very little formal education. But yes, I had briefly attended a local convent school. And he laughed again. "You got to the convent, didn't you, Paula?" I was about to reply, telling him he was wrong, because I'd only spent a few months at the convent. However, he interrupted. "You got to the convent, Paula, but you didn't get your education." The evidence was becoming overwhelming. "I'm sorry," I said. "I must be honest. I do not remember." And he said, "Oh, let me show you something. Come with me." And he took me to where the most beautiful Indian ladies were passing by. And he said, "Come and sit here a while." The Indian women walked up and down, giggling with their saris flowing behind them. And the priest looked at me and said, "Aren't they beautiful, Paula?" As a Western woman, my idea of beauty has always been the typical blue-eyed blonde with a bust. But suddenly I was looking at these Indian women and I saw their beauty. Not only did I see it, but I saw it through the eyes of a man. And finally I remembered. I remembered my previous life in India and how I loved to sit and watch the women walking by. We began to talk again. "What is your name now, Paula?" I told him I went by the name Paula Paradima. That is not so far from your last time." "Parakrish, is it?" he asked. And I said, "Why have I been here for 48 years and don't know this?" And he said, "At 49 you have to return to the temples. Do you not remember that?" Of course. I had been telling people my whole life that in the old days the young men would be taken to the temples at the age of 7 or 14 and trained for 14 years. They were then sent out into the world, promising to return at the age of 49. I laughed. Here I was doing it myself, and it all began to make sense. I had returned on instinct. I began to feel a lot easier within myself. Finally, I had found someone who knew me, where I came from, what was happening to me and why. And although I went home that night with more questions than answers, on the following Thursday I returned to give Ratatouille some healing for his hip. He was very worried he would not be able to take part in the big ceremony, which was planned when the priests were going to burn the old temple before moving into the new one. Ratatouille had been having a great deal of difficulty walking, so I quickly asked him to sit down and switched on some music I had brought to help me heal. It was very strange. Here we were in the Hindu temples, and the old rooms were suddenly filled with the booming sound of manifestations of the pyramids. I find Egyptian music helps me when I'm healing, and coincidentally I was also wearing Egyptian robes that day. As I worked, I noticed the old priest's hands kept shooting out, trying to push aside my cape. I thought it was a little strange, and I couldn't understand why he was doing this. After a number of attempts, he managed to move the cape and get a peek at my belly, which by this time was huge. "Ah," he said, "good." And it was then I understood. The Hindus believe that a healer's energy is stored in their belly, and Ratatouille would not have trusted me to heal him if I had been a slim female. Now, however, he relaxed and I was able to work uninterrupted. When I left, I knew that his hip had been healed, although he would feel no relief until a few days later. As I began packing up, Ratatouille asked me, "Are you a real clairvoyant too?" I told him I was. "Does not surprise me," he said. "Tell me when I go to India. When do I go home, Paula?" Whenever I give clairvoyance, I need to know the person's name and date of birth. And when I asked Ratatouille for this information, he became very upset and refused. He was adamant, "No, I can't do that. I will not do that." I asked him why. "If you give me your name and date of birth, I will tell you when you go home." He was aghast. "You can't do that, Paula. That's what the Swamis do." And then he said, "But of course, you Swami this time." He reluctantly gave me his details, and I confidently told him he would be going in September. He seemed pleased to have caught me out and was delighted to announce, "No, I go in August." I knew he would not, and I told him quite firmly, "You go in September." Needless to say, he went in September. The wheel of life is never wrong, and I had no doubt that I would be proved right. I was invited to go with him, but unfortunately I had to refuse. Later in this book you will learn how I use this information to predict the events and changes which lie ahead in someone's life. I later received a telephone call from Nina telling me that the visiting Swami had arrived, and she was trying to get me 3 minutes with him, and had sent me a letter to take to the temple on the day he was visiting. It was a lovely letter, written in a mixture of English and Hindu, and very childlike. But it was an earnest plea to the visiting Swami that I needed his help at this stage of my development, and I had the gift. There were thousands of people there that day, and when I arrived I was shocked to find that the main floor of the temple was on fire. They had actually lit a fire in the centre of the room and were all sitting around it, cooking and chanting. The first person I saw was Ratatouille. Our eyes met, and he literally ran across the room, speaking in Hindu and shouting to all the people in the room, "This is the woman who healed my hip." I was pleased to note that his hip was completely healed, and he was running up and down the room excitedly. All the men were looking at me with great respect. I was accepted among them, even though I was a Western woman with long red hair. We shared a meal together and then went to the new temple. It was a magnificent building, much larger than the previous temple, and the atmosphere was magical. The streets had been lined with flowers brought by the people, and the police were blocking the roads to allow huge lorries to come through, bringing even more flowers. It was a wonderful celebration, and I was glad I had come, but the crowds were so large I doubted I would even get to see the Swami. I pushed through to the temple door and handed them Nina's letter, and suddenly I was inside. I was brought a chair to sit on, although all the other women were sitting cross-legged on the floor. I must have looked strange sitting there, but in truth, it was the only place I felt I belonged. I prayed that the Swami would be able to help me. I felt a tap on my shoulder and was led through a series of corridors and stairways for what seemed like an age. Finally, a door was pushed open, and there he was. The Swami sat on a silk cushion in a big chair, surrounded by about 20 priests in orange robes. There was a strong smell of incense, which I found rather overpowering. I was surprised to see him, as it was only 4:30 p.m, and there were thousands of people lining the streets outside, waiting for him to arrive at 5 p.m. I felt extremely honoured as a Western female to be granted this time when so many of his own people would not be given this opportunity. I went straight to the front of the room and began talking. "Please, you must help me. What is this fire in my head? What is this blue light? How can I stop it?" Despite the seriousness of my pleas, I could not help but be amused by the way the 20 priests, all sitting cross-legged on the floor, were balancing on their tiptoes and leaning towards us, trying to hear what was being said. I was on my knees now. Please, you have to tell me how to get this out of my head and into my stomach. The fire is so strong, it burns so badly, I cannot handle it. The Swami was listening very intently and nodding, and all the while he was eating a handful of seeds. And finally he said, I cannot help thee. I have been eating. My head reeled, and by instinct I reached out and grabbed his hand. I grabbed it so tightly I felt him freeze and tried to pull his hand away. But I knew he felt my energy and he felt my despair. And I said, who can help me if you cannot? Please, you must. You must. He said, I cannot help you, but I will see you tomorrow at my house at 6 a.m. And it was then that I realised that the Swami did not wish to speak to me in front of the priests. I nodded and reluctantly left. Amazingly, I had been with the Swami for over half an hour, and I silently thanked Nina for her help. The next morning I got up very early and went to see the Swami. All the furniture had been removed from the huge house he was staying in, and he was once again surrounded by silk cushions. My husband and I were taken to his bedroom, and I immediately walked straight up to him. It was then that he told me a story about those who chose the smooth siddhi and those who chose the coarse siddhi. One chooses to spend their life sitting on silk cushions and developing their power through meditation and study. Those who are foolish prefer to spend their life as a female, walking among the people and suffering with them. Is it true you cannot reach Samadhi as a female? I asked, and he replied, it is true. Then why did I volunteer? I asked. Because you believed it was possible. Oh, excuse me, I've got such energy here. I believe it is possible. If you believe it is possible, then it becomes so. But I know of no female who has done it. He said, you are suffering so badly. Please come and sit here. And it was then that he gave me 2 mantras to use and taught me how to blow the energy out of my nostrils in a very violent manner, which most doctors would not recommend. I practice it very often and it helps me move energy out of my head. He asked me, why do you want to get rid of the energy, which is the action of the egg being the emerging crown chakra? And I said, I have to sometimes. He was very nice, very understanding. As I was leaving, he gave me some red roses, which I have still got, and he got out of his chair and touched me. God go with you, he said. He told me I now needed to find an adept yogi and gave me the list of names, but no addresses or telephone numbers, because if you truly need to find an adept yogi, then they will find you. My husband rang around every situation in the country until he got hold of an adept yogi. He explained my position and asked for the yogi's help. I am sorry, the yogi said, but I cannot help your wife. I have not gone this far myself. However, when your wife opens her head chakra, tell her I will come and kneel at her feet and she can be my guru. Later on, I was complaining to Ratatouille when he turned to me and said, we told you we would not be able to help you when you came, but you said you would do it. So do it. I have achieved much in the intervening years, not least of which is my work with the Wheel of Life. I was born with this knowledge and have used it throughout my entire life. I believe that something so accurate, so good, so beneficial to mankind should not be a secret. I don't believe this knowledge should only be given to certain people to make them seem like gods. I believe it belongs to the world, which is why I have decided to break the silence and why I have written this book. I want to give you a key which will open all the locks in your mind and allow you to develop the psychic gifts you've always possessed. The information I will give you will act like a catalyst, allowing you to tune into your higher self and finally recognise your truest potential. May God bless you. Paula Paradima. Well, that book on the Wheel of Life is currently in draft form in one of my old folders, and I'm going to make it a course. But I have to tidy it up, tighten it up, develop it. It was really only in draft form. It wasn't fully complete. I have used it myself. I do believe it is a key to opening up clear sentience and the other clear gifts, certainly your psychic abilities. And I hope to bring that out. I don't know how long it'll take me, at least 6 months, if not a little bit more. So it's a little bit teaser there. But I think that there's information in that for other people on this journey to Samadhi. And maybe some of that she speaks about, you know, it is something that affects you, and you can look into. I don't have the mantras that he gave her. They were private and unique to her. I don't have the technique for blowing air violently out your nostrils, blowing energy violently out your nostrils. I don't know how that works, but it might maybe be a breadcrumb on the trail for you if you're in a similar situation and have a fire in your head, you know, that you need to manage. I haven't experienced that myself yet, so I can't speak on that personally. All of these words were Paula's. I have quite a comprehensive pile of papers about her early life in a similar style, and I will be making, oh gosh, there might be many, quite, you know, a little series of videos from that biography or autobiography, I'm not sure which. It's her words. I'll be recording them because there's valuable insights in them too. So I'll be doing that shortly, and I hope that has intrigued you, made you think a little bit, given you some ideas and helped you in some way. Okay, I'll leave you with that to mull it over. I'll send you some healing from my hands, as us healers can do, and I wish you all the very, very best. God bless. Speak again soon.